Recording. Yes. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much
Hi.
for coming to this recording of the Golchakkar, where we will be profiling the lovely Sarita Jenamani and the lovely Rosalyn de Mello for a unique perusal into what European life looks for Indian migrants. I am a global traveler who's lived all over the world, and I've partnered with the lovely Kiran Bhat to also talk about these different ways that Indian artists, both abroad and inside of India, are channeling globalization and are affected by globalization. Karan, if you would you like to tell us a little bit about the Chakkar, the space that we're doing this from?
Yeah, thank you, Kiran. Can you guys hear me okay?
No, I'm not hearing you properly,
Right,
actually.
might be some issue with my. Is this better? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, that's
Okay.
right. And that's fine,
Yeah,
Karan,
it
yes.
might have been my my speakers. Yeah, thank you, Kiran. First of all, welcome to you, Sarita. Welcome, Rosalyn. We are super excited to have you guys on the platform. I'm Karan Madhok. I'm the founder and editor of thechakkar.com. And we run this website. It's on Indian arts and culture. We do reviews, essays. We try to publish poetry and fiction and all. We just try to promote as much good writing about India and good creativity about India and beyond as much as possible. And when Kiran came to us with this fascinating idea of bringing together um, people of Indian origin with literary backgrounds, literary ideas from all over the world, I knew we had to jump on this. So thank you guys for joining us for another episode of Golchakkar. And I'll let you guys and Kiran take it away from here.
Perfect. And I think that's something also, thank you, Karan, for putting a spotlight on the fact that we're trying to create a global space for Indian or Indian origin authors. I mean, I thought it was interesting to have two speakers who are coming not from India at the moment or coming from necessarily Britain or the US, but certain European countries that are normally not in the background of at least global. I mean, of course, in certain ways, they are. Germany and Italy are both extremely important for global literature, but certainly there's another relationship there, and I wanted to provoke that and talk about that because I think that's something that we in the English language or the English speaking world don't really think about often. So would any of you two first like to give a short introduction about yourselves, your background, where you're coming from, where you're staying now, a little bit about what you write about? Either Rosalyn or Sarita, any of you two, whichever one wants to start.
Go on, Rosalyn.
Put on the spot.
So I am I call myself a Bombay Goan from Mumbai because I grew up in Mumbai in a very Goan Catholic community, and I lived in Mumbai till I was about 20. I graduated as an English literature student from St. Xavier's College, and then I went to JNU in New Delhi, where I did my master's. And soon after, I was back in Bombay, but then I found myself drawn to Delhi because somehow it felt like, to me, a more international city. It felt more intellectually stimulating, exciting. So I moved to Delhi in 2010, and I lived there for 10 years. In different parts of Delhi, and I worked across different industries, from publishing to art criticism. I worked in a gallery. I worked with a private foundation, and all the time continued as a writer. And then in around 2015, I published my first book. Called A Handbook for My Lover, and now I'm in Italy, where I met my partner whom I'm married, and we live in the northern part of Italy, which is an autonomous province. Um, it used to be part of Austria. It's a very German-speaking part of Italy, which is very culturally different from the rest of Italy. If someone from this part goes to, say, Venice, they say they are going to Italy, which I find really funny. But at the same time, I find it interesting that I've come to a region that has a history of colonization under, Nazi occupation, under Italian occupation, and it's really interesting to see how it has navigated its own past and how it kind of preserves its cultural roots. It's a very rooted place, and I'm really enjoying the culture as I get to know more. I live in a town of like 3,500, less than 3,500 inhabitants, which I find really funny because in New Delhi, I think there were that many people in the country. So yeah, it's weird. It's very new. A lot of it is very new. Just understanding seasons, experiencing winter for the first time, and yeah. And I think I find that career-wise, it seems more interesting for me because I feel like there are a lot more opportunities. There seems to be a bit more value, actually a lot more value for what I do as a writer than back home. Yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'll talk about it later. I'm so excited to know more about Sarita.
Yes, I think this is yes, I think this is itself a very interesting space to be writing from, because often we forget that a lot of, not just different parts of India, but a lot of parts of the world have this kind of shared history of different communities coming. Like right now I'm visiting Florida, and Florida also has a lot of Hispanic influence in a way that people don't think about. So it's just interesting to think about how different communities, you know, have different stories and different migration patterns. So Litha, can you tell us a little bit about your own migration story, or even if you don't, just a little bit about yourself and, you know, where you're coming from, your
Yes,
locations, etc.
yes, yes. First of all, thank you very much, Kiran and Karan, for providing this platform. And it's such a nice initiative because in India we always concentrate on diasporic literature. I mean, always the writer who was living in Anglophonic countries. So yeah, that's why I find it different, and I'm also excited that, and I'm happy that I am sharing this podium with you guys. I'm from Odisha. I mean, probably you know that it is in the eastern part of India. And when I was rather young, I was in university, so I got a scholarship for young writers, a fellowship by Heinrich Böll Foundation. So they invited writers to be in Germany to live in the ancestral home of Heinrich Böll, the German Nobel laureate who got the Nobel Prize in 72. So I came there as a young writer, and then afterwards I met my husband there, and then I mean future husband, and we got an offer from city of Vienna to move here as writer, city writer. They called it Stadtschreiber. So we move here, and it's a beautiful place, and I mean, it's the most livable place in the world. So it's a, city with a history, and it's a beautiful place to live. So I went for my higher studies here. I mean, I have not studied literature as Rosalyn did. I earned my bread. I mean, I have a background in economics and business studies, so I work as a marketing manager here in a corporate sector. But writing was and is and will be always my passion. It's something that balances my lifestyle here. So when I come here, it was 2002, 2003 actually, when I moved to Vienna with a single word of German. Actually, I was speaking English, and I didn't even know. I mean, except saying good morning and good night, nothing about German. So it's. But I was fortunate enough that I came as a city writer, so we had connection to the literary circle here. But it is not that easy to get integrated into the culture if you come to the part of Europe that is not Anglophone. So people, I mean, Austria, it was the third largest empire of Europe, but they never see beyond Ukraine. So it was quite difficult to establish myself, but even then I keep on learning German, and I try to integrate into literary field. And then in 2018 I got elected to the PEN International's Austrian chapter's general secretary. Um, Published here books. And then off and on, when I was not working full time, I was taking writers fellowship, and now I translate from German to my mother tongue in order to stay in touch with my mother tongue, because probably it's quite funny to know is, except my son, I don't have anyone who speaks here my language. So I've landed to in a linguistic limbo, and um, it's a quite extraordinary experience for a writer. If you're a writer and you come to a place and your main tool is your language, and you don't know the language of the place, and you always look back to your home country, and then you see that how people forget you there, and you still have time to get integrated in this scenario. So maybe we can come to that afterwards.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point to talk about, and I'd love to talk about it a little bit more. I think at this particular moment, I would like to focus a little bit more on that integration, which I think is very important. Sarita, how do you feel? You said that Austria is not as particularly easy to integrate in regards to, the linguistic and cultural scene as compared to the Anglophonic world. Do you have any strategies or hints for people who would come to Europe or come to the German-speaking world? Like, how would you recommend people in such a context to start to approach literary production in Austria or the German-speaking world? And would you recommend it? Do you believe that outside of the particular reasons that brought you there, do you think that it's worth being from the Indian context, coming to Austria and trying to produce literature?
I mean, as you know, India is a global player now. So people are interested in India. People want to know about India. But even then, India for them is a periphery. I mean, Austrian, they have a very, very European outlook. I mean, European superiority, I must say, because it was never a country that has colonies, so they don't have any interaction with the people of other region. So when they say we have interaction and we have a broader viewpoint, then as I told you, they go to Romania, maybe go to Ukraine. Those were part of the Habsburg monarchy, the Austrian K&K monarchy. So if you are a, Indian, or you come from a background without any knowledge of German, then you have to have a lot of stamina. That I have to say, because people always push you back, and they always because now they are having a lot of refugee, they have having the literature of the immigrants, but they always termed it as the immigrants literature, and they always expect that you write about only your immigration, only the loss, about your loss of home, only about your memory, and they termed it as immigrant literature. Whereas I think if you have decided that you are moving to some part of world, you cannot trap yourself only in memories. You have to move forward, because we all are immigrant. Actually, if we are not considered in terms of space, but in terms of time, we are all immigrants, of course, in our own country. And for the immigrants like us, when we are thinking about home and trying to think about India, I mean, even if we try to go back to India, it is not the same India that we left. But as you told me, that I will say that one should have a lot of stamina. One should always have that strength to push back all this reservation. And I mean, I can say it, that's what I did. When I came, I was not speaking a word of German. I don't consider my German is that good also, because my working language is, of course, German. I translate from German, because the more you live in a place, the more nuances of the language you know. And then you think that, am I mean, do I have skill enough to use these nuances of language, what we know in English while growing up in India? But that's another thing. But you keep on learning, you mix with people, and when there is a will, there is a way, and you always find a way. I mean, there's always the mainstream writers platform. They always depict you or name you or label you as an immigrant writers. But see what happened. I mean, Pen Austria is established in 1999 here in Vienna, and at last they accepted me and elected me as their general secretary. So that is something. I mean, just keep on trying, keep on I mean, you find always people who really like your idea and accept you, and the world is changing, and it's changing constantly. So that's what I can say.
Yeah, they're all very valid points, Sarita, and I appreciate you for making them. Rosalyn, do you agree with Sarita? Have you had this difficulty, or have, for you being in the German-speaking part of Italy, has it been a more like integrative place for you? Do you feel like your experiences have been better or worse, or how have they been?
So I think because I live in a German-speaking part of Italy, if I want to get a job here, I need to know two languages, not one. And I think that definitely complicates things. It's not enough for me to be fluent in German. I need to be fluent in Italian as well. And if I were to consider citizenship, again, I would need to have a level of Italian. So this definitely makes things a lot harder. And I think there are a couple of things that I feel worked in my favor. One is the fact that I came here, like now, settle myself down here at the age of 35, where I already have a career, where over the last 10 years I've been working internationally as an art critic. So I had networks, and I had been into this region before on a residency. So I would say that for me, it's been a softer landing for sure. And I have, in the last 6 months, definitely relied on those networks in order to find work. Um, and that was a bit, I think I needed to do that because I needed to know I could earn enough money without having fluency in the languages that I needed, so that I knew I could manage, I could be financially independent. It has been very important to me all my life. I've been like financially independent since I was 21 or 22. I've never relied on another person for money. So that was hard for me. But I think the other thing that worked in my favor is that I'm living with my partner and his parents. So that's definitely made it easier for me because it gives me a bit of time to set up our own apartment, our own house. So it gives us an opportunity to earn some money. I also live in a very farming centered society, which I enjoy very much because my uh, family has like an apple plantation, for example, and I really enjoy working with them on projects and stuff like that. The other thing that I think has worked in my favor throughout my time in India, I don't think I ever really felt like I belonged anywhere. I grew up, my mother was a migrant from Goa, moved to Bombay, as a private nurse, and then she met my father, who was also a Goan immigrant, but his family had migrated to Bombay before. So and both of them came from fairly humble backgrounds. And one of the reasons my mother never spoke to me in our mother tongue was because she really wanted to learn English. It's like it was the And if I were to succeed, or me and my siblings, we needed to know English. And she always said, "Oh, Konkani is really easy. You can always just pick it up at any time in your life." And even when I moved to Delhi, and I was like the only girl on campus. There were my roommate in JNU, Sudha, was from Orissa. The people on my floor were from like Kerala, from the northeast. Each of them had their own community, like a small network. And I was like the only girl, and I couldn't belong to any community because there was no one else. And I think somewhere I've always carried this loneliness of being the only Goan person, and also because when you speak about colonization, Goa had a very different history of colonization, because we were colonized by a different European force. So I think somewhere I've always felt that alienation, even in terms of food, in terms of the language, the kind of English we speak back home. And maybe that's why it doesn't feel so strange to me over here. And I think in Delhi, I always spoke really bad Hindi, like really bad Hindi. And weirdly enough, I find that is helping me with German now, because I'm less afraid of making mistakes and making an ass of myself, because I just rely on people correcting me. I mean, all the time. And in the beginning, I would be a bit more defensive about it, but now I'm really not. I just feel like each time. So I've not gone to an institution to learn German. My partner has been teaching me, and his parents speak to me in German. And so it's been just deep, deep, deep immersion in German. So it's been a very different experience, and I think definitely my history of having been a migrant makes me a lot more resourceful as a person. I know how to rely on secret intelligences that are passed on from your mother, which I'm sure Sarita knows what I mean. There's this kind of resourcefulness, which is a housewife or a very mature kind of resourcefulness that you carry with you wherever you go. And I think that has been, for me, a lot more, it has helped me a lot more than any other skill that I've had.
That's very valuable. Thank you, Rosalyn, for those words. And it's also interesting, this act of learning a new language completely as an adult and having to assimilate to it. How has that affected your writing? Do you choose to now write a little bit in German? And if not, how does now having to be a German speaker, sometimes an Italian speaker, affect the way that you write in your mother tongue?
I think for me, I've definitely become a better writer in English, because suddenly I feel like, oh my God, I'm so comfortable in English. It's like I can do somersaults, I can dance, I can do many things with English. In fact, in the process of learning German, I acquired so many other skills, because to me, everything else felt easier. Like I learned how to crochet, I learned how to embroider, I don't know, I learned many other things. Everything felt easier than learning German. However, I write, my partner also, he's someone who's like, he has a love for language. And I think how a language is taught to you, or how you learn a language, also plays a role in whether you like it or not. And I think somehow, because it's a language that we now share with each other, I've been enjoying it a lot. And there are a lot of things in German right now. For example, in order to practice like conjunctive eins, I write recipes in German and I share them with people around here. And then I also write little letters in German, and he corrects them. And so I'm really enjoying the language. I like so many small things about German that make it so particular and so specific, like how there's a particular word for when you're walking on snow that has a certain texture. And this word or verb is only used, I think, when you're walking on snow, to describe that stuff. I like they really, I find them fascinating. And I think because I am someone who loves food, and I enjoy being in kitchens. And I'm also very interested in how so many languages like Konkani survived as kitchen languages. I think I primarily learned language. I'm learning German, and now I will learn it. I'm learning Italian through the kitchen, you know, like through recipes, and the kitchen becomes a kind of motivating energy.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing as well, that space of learning a language and using it like like you're learning it in a very specific way, and that also gives it a novelty and pleasure that the mother tongue might not necessarily have. Sarita, would you like to weigh in on your process in regards to whether if you're writing in a new language, and if you're not, then how is it affecting your Odia or your English and your production in those languages?
Yeah, sure. When I come here without prior knowledge of German, as Rose, you landed in a vacuum, in a lingual vacuum. You hear the melody of a new language, but you don't understand it. And I went to a school, I did a couple of courses, but as Rosalyn said, that the best method is that to communicate without hesitation. I'm a really communicative person, and I knew that I cannot be going to survive without communicating. So the only way open for me was to make mistake and to learn from that. And I told the people around me that when I make a mistake, please tell me at once that I'm making a mistake. I'm making a wrong use of the language. So that's how I started learning. But
You
it
don't
is
need
quite a
to correct you; they just correct you voluntarily.
so so when I start um, actually it's a bit painful process, because in that process you never know that if the joy of learning a new language is more, or the it is pathetic to lose your own language, lose in that sense that I used to dream, or you dream in your own mother tongue, that the language you are born and brought up with. And in my family, there was a very, they stress very much that you know your mother tongue very much. And it was, and when you come to a new place, you learn so many new things, and then you don't have the language for them in your own mother tongue. So you are forced to listen to the new voices, and you start to actually dream in a new language. And in that process, your own language, writer's voice, that is always there inside you. Sometimes it slumbers, sometimes you think it is dying, but every language, they have their own perception, they have their own Weltanschauung, a view of world. So if when you learn a new language, you find yourself a completely different perspective, it gives you a very special place. And that's why I think the in our age, the immigrant literature is that, because that's why important, because it's provide you a new perspective. You look at your own place, looking back home, you look at it in another perspective, and that is not available to people who are writing there in India. And you have another perspective of the place where you are staying, and the native people of Austria, maybe they don't have that perspective, because it's a perspective of an outsider. And that's what enriched my writing. So I work in German. My language of work is in German. I write essays in German when I have to, or articles, and write short poems, because basically I'm a poet. I write short poems in German, but when they come to me spontaneously, I never sit, and because I'm a poet, I have another method of writing. So sometimes it's very, very interesting that when I'm writing, now it is something come in my mother tongue, then I write that down, and then something in English, and then in German, and then you have to work on it afterwards. So it's quite an interesting process, because then you traverse through different universe, and you show your own path, you show your own truth. And sometimes I really worried that I will lose my mother tongue, because literally I'm not using it that much. And that's why I thought that I will translate the literature of German into my mother tongue. And that is the only way I can stay in contact with the literary Odia. But more and more, I perceive that I'm switching more and more to English, because this is a very universal language, and you can put your experience of an immigrant in English. I mean, in my case, that's why I'm switching. I'm writing more and more in English, but I always try to keep all three languages. I mean, work with my mother tongue and English and German. But German, I don't see it as my creative language.
So I want you raised a lot of interesting points that I want to eventually circle back to, but right now I think it would be valuable to talk a little bit about your role as an editor and a translator as well. Could you speak a little bit more about your work? I know that you edit a fairly prominent Austrian magazine, and I'd like to learn a little bit more about your translation work as well.
Well, as I told you, that I mean, I see this is my social responsibility or responsibility as a writer, that besides my own writing and my own production, I should provide my fellow writer who is, because in migration, I'm editing this magazine, Words and Words, Welte und Worte und Welten, to provide a platform, to provide a chance to publish to the immigrant writer in Austria or elsewhere who are still writing in their own mother tongue, or another language that is not local to the place they are moving into. And that's how, and I told you before, it happened, that's how, because in 2015, as Europe was witnessing the refugee crisis, and a lot of people came to Europe, and then we thought that we shouldn't forget that there is so many people are coming. They have lost a wealth behind, and they have so many stories to tell. Maybe there are so many writers, and maybe they don't know German yet to express themselves. And you know, when you come to a new place, a major part of your identity is your language. So if you can write, if you're a writer, you can go on writing your own language, it seems that you are retained a large part of your identity. So that's the reason why we started this magazine. And it was supported by Pain Austria, because we thought that it is I mean, Pain works also for endangered languages. So so I'm editing it because, but it is not only my magazine. I have also edited quite other few books. I have co-edited a book on Indian partition poetry, and I edited a book on the writers in prison around the world. And recently I edited a book on women's poetry written on violence against women. It's a very recent one. So in this process, I just want to build a writers community. I want the voices that individually get lost should find a place, because together, you are much more stronger than as an individual writer. So I think this is the why I have started editing and translation. As I told, this is my only possibility to be in contact with my own mother tongue. And I have translated quite a few German poetry. That I have translated contemporary Austrian poetry, and I have translated Rosa Ausländer. She was a Holocaust writer. I have translated another contemporary poet, Helmut Niederle. Then now I'm translating Rilke into my own language.
Very good, Sarita. I think those are all wondrous avenues for wonderful transnational literatures, and I hope you'll put a link to World in Words down at the bottom, and I hope that people who watch this video later will submit. Rosalyn?
That's how I see myself as a cultural bridge,
Yes.
because you transport the culture, the treasure of the culture from one country to another. And this book which I mentioned, there's the writing women poetry, writing about violence against women. It is a book on South Asian women, and I'm also translating it to German now.
Wonderful. Rosalyn, what about your work as either a editor or even just whatever work you do as well outside of writing? How does that inform your literary production?
Actually, I have been working for the last few years on the sequel to my first book. And this is a really exciting book because it's called The Miracle of the Loaves and the Fish. And it's a book about food and the prophetic female tongue, as I call it. And so language becomes a very important part of it. Food is a very important part of it. Prophecy and mysticism. I kind of use the tongue as this metaphor that connects very different kinds of practices. And because of that, I think I have a different attitude towards the world, and I think this helps me a lot because I have therefore a kind of openness to it. I see how I could have been more resistant to maybe the culture over here. And I have friends, for example, around here who are from other parts of the world. Like I have a friend who's from Israel who really struggles with learning German because it's just, there are these mental blocks that we have, and they sometimes prevent us from moving towards something. And I think in many ways, my writing process helps me because it's kind of like this osmotic process where I'm constantly receiving things, receiving ideas and sounds and images, and kind of then in my writing, infusing them into a narrative. And at the same time, I also work a lot with art, with contemporary art. I write intensely. I mean, a lot of my career over the last 10 years has been sustained by my practice as an art critic. And I think this has helped me a lot because I've always been drawn towards artists and their studios. One of the books I'm working on for Oxford University Press is a book based on my visits to artist studios. And I think this helps me because wherever I go, I always find artists, and that always helps me access a poetic register. And I think it also helps me seek out kinds of practices over others. And I think, again, being a feminist, having an exceptional feminist, definitely broadens my worldview. I've always struggled with seeing myself as an Indian or being identified. Not because I'm a regionalist, so to speak. I've never been a person who subscribes to the idea of religion. I was very early in my life, I was influenced by the writings of Tagore, and I think his critique of nation. So I like not seeing myself in terms of nation, because I think it also helps me to see people as people, and not as nationalities, or not as not limited by that. I think that makes it more exciting, and I think I'm interested in like the story of how people carry their regions with them, and I think for me it's more connected to notions of home and what constitutes your idea of domestic. I have this problem with the Indian narrative just because it's a way of placing people. So if somebody asks me where I'm from, and if I say I'm from India, I feel like I get placed in a certain way that I want to resist, because I don't want to perform as an Indian. I don't subscribe to many of even the political ideologies that most Indians right now are into. And I think I've always seen myself as someone who claims allegiance with people, and indigenous cultures, and I consciously try to support that in my practice. I like very much in right now because it has that complexity. I really like that I'm not. Um, I like that I'm in a bilingual place because people have to constantly make allowances for each other. And I think South Tyrol is a really nice example of how people have had to accommodate each other, and also then how they have to see their own history and their own past and constantly challenge existing narratives. I really like the fact that when you go to Austria, all the, there's always this one part of one side of the station that's like Südtiroler Platz, which is like almost, kind of like harking back to that. I like all these kind of stories that um, that that move through the mountains, and then move towards the sea and kind of spread out, and how these things then manifest in food choices, in the kind of food we eat, the kind of food we serve. So yeah, I think sometimes for me, food becomes a more exciting way also to think about language. Right now, because I'm such a minority here in this part of Italy, I really depend on the few Pakistani shops in Boston, to get like my masalas. And I love that when I go there, I can speak to them in my really messed up Hindi, and they don't care that it's messed up. They just care that we have a language with which we can communicate. And then that gives me a sense of solidarity and comfort, which I don't know, it's hard to explain. That has nothing to do with me being Indian, him being Pakistani. It just has to do with us that share histories, and that want to connect and want to transcend barriers. Through this nexus of food, we find this way of communion. I like that.
Very good. I feel like you've touched on a lot of things which interest me and which are of value and interest, because there's just so much that is changing in the world. And we are soon to wrap up. We don't have a lot of time left, but I want you to reflect for me just shortly on what you think the future is, because we are living in a world that is changing and that is becoming something else. So coming from the standpoint, being of Indian origin, but living in Italy and Austria respectively, how do you imagine the future and of language, of culture, of writing? But keep it fairly short if you can. Rosalyn, we'll start with you.
Oh, um, I like to think of the future where we learn to communicate with each other in ways that are inflected by kindness, irrespective of the language. I think that's, if there's one thing that's missing in the world, it's kindness. And I like to imagine more of that in the world.
That's a beautiful thought. I think kindness, empathy, these are all things that we need more of. So Litha, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I can also wish as did Rosalyn did, because the situation which we are going through politically and also health-wise, it's not a very favorable situation. India is now seems to be struck somewhere in between the post-colonial pride and the I mean imperial ambition, and I find there is no place for a dreamer, a place for an outsider, or a person who fails but he dreams for that narrative. And I should and I hope this world become more kinder and provide us space to breathe. And even if we think that we are standing on a ruin, I think the humanity always bounced back. And I hope and I wish that in near future we as a human race bounce back, and we perceive ourselves as one community beyond all this artificial notions like border or nationality. That's what I can wish.
It's a grand wish, and I think that it's something that we all hope for, that we start to find a way to bridge these borders, or to learn their lack of utility, and to kind of see the world more as one. Well, thank you so much, you two, for coming. There was a lot in here. Sadly, we do not have the time to really go into all of them in depth, but I hope to continue the conversation with you all, at least privately, or through reading your writing. And I hope to see more of your writing out there. I hope more people also peruse the spaces that you curate for, both as artists and editors. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming, and I wish you all the best and for a very good rest of your day.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for this platform to express yourself and to get to know each other more betterly. Thank you, Kiran.
No problem. Rosalyn, you're on mute.
Sorry. I said thank you for facilitating. It's so nice to know that the next time I'm in Vienna, I can look up Sarita and I can go meet her.
Yeah.
And yeah.
We'll go
And
for a
maybe,
coffee, we'll have chat.
yeah, I was going to ask you to cook fish for me, maybe.
I hope if I ever come to Austria or Italy, I'll have someone to visit.
Yes.
Will be much hotter. I didn't expect it in
Vienna
the
is very famous for its chocolate cake and coffees, and I love to host you guys.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, until then, I guess.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.